Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Tracking the Tropics. I'm CBS 17 Chief Meteorologist Wes Hohenstein in Raleigh, North Carolina. And as you know, we are tracking now Hurricane Isaias. Breaking news as we begin tonight at 8 o'clock on the East Coast. The Hurricane Hunter aircraft just found stronger winds now up to 75 miles per hour, making it a hurricane again. It is now the longest lived named system of the year. This is the 5th day that we have had Isaias, the longest named storm of the season so far. We've got a lot to show you tonight. I'm going to break down exactly what's going to happen with the system as it moves up the coast. We'll check in with our team of reporters on the coast in North and South Carolina. Plus, we'll go to eastern North Carolina where the eye of Isaias may pass over early Tuesday morning. So let's get right to it. To the graphics we go, and I want to start with radar. You know, today has progressed into more of a nowcasting day for a lot of us on the East Coast because we're seeing more and more impacts. The last 5-6 days, we've been doing a lot of forecasting, talk about where that cone is going to bring this storm. Well, guess what? The storm is here. Our friends down in South Carolina from Charleston up through Myrtle Beach and along the North Carolina coast are currently seeing those heavy rain bands. And remember, it's the heavy rain bands that bring the gusty winds. It's the heavy rain bands that bring obviously most of the rain and also the threat of tornadoes. In fact, tonight as the storm, the eye is about 60 miles east of Charleston, South Carolina. Some of those outer rain bands have reached the southern coast of North Carolina. And this just popped up about 30 minutes ago. We've got an active tornado warning until 8:15. A couple of things about tropical tornadoes. They're usually weak and they usually don't last long. Unfortunately, they're also hard to detect. So while they're not strong, I mean, it's still a tornado. And while they don't last long, it doesn't take long to do damage. And plus, they're hard to detect on the radar. So it's just not a good recipe for one of the many things that we have to keep an eye on. So again, the Hurricane Hunter aircraft, even though it's only 60 miles east of Charleston, South Carolina, it is still over water. They are still flying the system, continuing to try to detect exactly where it is, get current conditions so we can in tune share that with everyone so we can be more prepared. And also, all that information continues to get fed into the forecast because we want to fine-tune that even as it moves inland and up the East Coast. So just in from the Hurricane Center a couple minutes ago, 75 mile per hour sustained winds. The pressure at 988, that's also down just a little bit. And like we've been talking about over the last couple of hours, if you just kind of step back and look at the system, doesn't it look a little better organized? It doesn't look as ragged or lopsided as it has the last few days. And when a system looks like it's getting better organized, it usually is. You know, the saying in life, you know, don't judge a book by its cover. You can judge the book by this cover. It looks more organized, and it is. It's also still moving north-northeast at 16 miles per hour. We anticipate that forward speed to increase over the next couple of days. So here it is in a loop, and you can see it's got that swirl. Last few days, you've been tracking this, hasn't really had that swirl. So that's an important characteristic. However, the good news is it's about to run into land. That's good news because it's getting better organized, but it doesn't have much more time over water. So we don't expect this to be a huge, intense, major hurricane. As we look at live readings along the water and the coast of North and South Carolina, these are the current wind gusts. I'm looking at this buoy. I've been watching this one. We've got a 49 mile per hour gust. Right here, I know it's hard to see because the eye is actually over this buoy that's just east of Charleston. Look at that, a 78 mile per hour gust. So let me take you back actually to the readings from the Hurricane Hunter. 75 mile per hour winds gusting up to 85. Well, look here, we've got proof of that. Just offshore, a buoy picking up a 78 mile per hour gust. And remember, it's that eye, it's that wind gust that's going to be pushing inland across South and North Carolina as we head into tonight. What about the track? Here is the latest forecast track. You can see that cone is a lot more narrow than it was in the last 3 and 4 days. Expected to move inland either on the northern tip of South Carolina or somewhere in the southern beaches of North Carolina sometime late tonight. Then it'll move across Interstate 40 about 2 a.m. Tuesday morning with 70 mile per hour winds. And then very quickly, it's really going to pick up speed, which is going to prevent this from becoming a flooding disaster. And it'll be all the way up toward parts of Maryland, and Delaware as we head into Tuesday afternoon. The 5 p.m. center line, I always like to do this to show you what's changed with the track. I'm going to put that in red, and then I'm also going to put in a white line, which was the 11 a.m. track. So the 11 a.m. track is white. The 5 p.m. is red. You can see how everything shifted just a little to the east. Now that's got a lot of us excited, but small shifts at this point aren't really going to change the forecast track. So let's take the forecast track all the way up the East Coast. Again, making landfall sometime late Monday night around the North Carolina, South Carolina border. Then it'll move across Interstate 40 and just zoom through the eastern part of North Carolina while bringing heavy rain, wind, and the threat of tornadoes. Then it makes it into Virginia about 6 a.m. Tuesday, and then it continues up, east of the nation's capital, up toward Delaware by lunchtime, essentially. And then look there, it's moving into New Jersey by the afternoon. It's up around New York City by dinner time. And then it continues to speed off to the north, eventually moving into Canada by late Tuesday into Wednesday. So it's going to be a fast mover, which is so different than the storms we've had over the last several years. Slow mover, disastrous flooding events. This one's a different one, but we still have lots of warnings. Look at all the tropical warnings we have. We've got a tropical storm warning pretty much for most of South Carolina and North Carolina. The red that you see is actually a hurricane warning, and that makes sense now that the storm has returned to hurricane status. And remember, these warnings mean that you will have tropical storm or hurricane conditions within the next 24 to 36 hours. So those warnings go all the way up the northeast coast. So even though it's not an overly powerful major hurricane, this is still going to bring a lot of impacts. And let's talk about the rain impacts. This is what the radar will look like tonight in the 8 and 9 o'clock hour. So from current conditions, we can see the heaviest rain moving into eastern and central North Carolina. This is 1 a.m. Tuesday. The system will start to fall apart a little bit, but the moisture will hang on. 3 a.m. heavy rain across central North Carolina. Then the heavy rain at 6 a.m. on Tuesday moves into Virginia. That heavy rain moves over our nation's capital up toward New Jersey and Pennsylvania by lunchtime Tuesday. Again, a fast mover, so this rain's not going to produce 10, 20 inches of rain, but it could produce some heavy downpours, creating some isolated flooding. And then up toward New York by dinner time Tuesday. So in 24 hours, this is going to make a lot of headway, and then moving into parts of Canada by late Tuesday night and early Wednesday morning before it really starts to fall apart. Let's talk about the winds. This is the wind field of tropical storm force winds, and we'll pick it up from the current conditions. So anytime you see yellow, that's a tropical storm force wind gust, about 40 miles per hour and higher. So those have already started to push onto the North Carolina coast. And as you can see, this moves up very quickly. For some reason, all my pause points didn't show up there. But notice how the wind field holds together even through early Wednesday morning. So again, now go back to live radar. You can see we have not only one, but two different tornado warnings for southern North Carolina and parts of northern South Carolina. It's expected to be a busy night. Let's get to our first guest of the evening. So I'm in central North Carolina. My meteorology brother in eastern North Carolina is WNCT meteorologist Jerry Jackson. He's in Greenville, North Carolina. Jerry, it's going to be a long night for a lot of us in North Carolina. Let's talk about these tornado warnings. That's no surprise. We're worried about that. Are you surprised, though, that it went back to hurricane status? I just didn't think it was going to happen. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we were talking yesterday about the fact that there were conflicting factors as far as the intensification forecast is concerned. On one hand, this system has had a tremendous amount of wind shear tearing into it over the past 2 or 3 days. Enough wind shear that, quite honestly, I've seen plenty of systems that that type of wind shear would have just torn it all to pieces. This thing has managed to deal with it. One thing that has been in favor of strengthening has been its position and track over the past couple of days near some of the warmest waters you can find out over the Gulf Stream. And we've seen so many times how tropical systems that look like they might be dying or relatively weak, they get that little zone, that small little window of opportunity between Florida and North Carolina. If they track along those Gulf Stream waters, it does not take long at all for a system to re-intensify. So we've actually been telling our viewers, hey, look, prepare for the possibility of a landfalling hurricane. And indeed, it looks like that is going to be a definite possibility now as we head over the next little bit. In fact, this system is moving fairly quickly. Let's take a look at some of the numbers here. And this is a live I-9 camera view out of New Bern at the moment. And Wes and I were talking earlier. He was asking me if we had our camera out at the beach we could pull up. It's actually a little fogged over at the moment, but this shows you a different area of water along the North Carolina coast. And this proves a good point that we sometimes tell folks who are new to tropics. It just doesn't set in with a nonstop wall of wind and water. When you go through a tropical system, sometimes it can start out gradually. We've actually had a couple of bands of wind and rain that our counties have already been dealing with today, little squall lines, if you will, but nothing overly impressive. And that's the way it goes. You start out with a band, then you get a break, then another band, but as you head deeper into the night, the bands tend to get a little heavier, the activity tends to get a little more impressive, and that's going to be the case for us. We've really noticed the pressure now starting to drop in Greenville quite a bit, down to 29.98 inches, obviously a little cooler today with the extra clouds. The winds still not overly impressive at the moment, but in some of the heavier squalls, you're starting to see a few 20, 30 mile per hour gusts. And I think there's going to be a sharp increase in the wind field. And that's why we're warning our residents around here. The core effects for our viewing area in eastern North Carolina are going to be occurring in the middle of the night, which sometimes can be very bad because people are trying to go to sleep and maybe they're not as weather aware as they would be otherwise. So we're really trying to emphasize, make sure you have a way to receive the watches and warnings. As Wes was pointing out, already some tornado warnings in effect down towards Brunswick County and also Columbus County, and that line will extend. This particular squall line of interest right here is going to be affecting our southern counties very, very soon. Here's the wider view, and again, the forecast cone, and Wes was talking about the speed. It is so nice if we have to deal with the tropical system. We don't want to, but if we have to, it's so nice to finally have one that's moving instead of just sitting still on top of you for days on end. This thing is going to make a landfall probably near Calabash, right on the North Carolina-South Carolina border, either side of midnight. It'll already be pushing through most of our viewing area by the time we wake up tomorrow morning, and then it is out of here by later tomorrow afternoon. Now, for our viewers here in the eastern part of the state, this is our precision cast model, and you can just see how it leaps up to the north, so already close to wake-up time. Center of circulation is getting close to the border, and then it's out of here. It's finally falling under the influence of an incoming front-trough combination that has been much advertised for a long, long time now. Our viewers are going to see a lot of heavy rain, but as Wes was telling you a bit earlier, the fact the system is moving means that we're going to see 4 to 6 inches instead of 10, 12, 15 inches. So that will help some, but these rainfall totals are going to be more than enough for some flash flooding concerns, also the possibility of some near hurricane force wind gusts. And the way the system is tracking, many of our viewers are going to be on the right side of the circulation path. That's the stronger side of the storm where the greater tornado potential lies. So we've really been trying to emphasize that over the past several days, our tornado risk, and of course our seas running high out there as well. Our storm surge is something we're also monitoring, possibility of 2 to 4 foot surge inundation along some of our coastal waters. Some of the highest impact zones will be Oceanside, Crystal Coast, the Outer Banks from about Rodanthe down to Cape Lookout, Manio, Kitty Hawk, even up north around Highway 12. Ocean wash is fairly common with this type of weather setup that we have here. But and there incidentally are the tide change times there. You can see are just after 8 o'clock tomorrow morning over around the Cape Lookout area on Tuesday morning is high tide. And you know, Wes, when we were talking about these things, we try to emphasize to viewers that you can't always look at what the storm did in other states, because if you look down to like Florida and even into parts of Georgia, they were on the weaker side of this system. Our viewing area in eastern North Carolina is going to be on the right side of the track, and that makes a huge difference, as you full well know.
Yeah, indeed it does. And I'll let everyone at home watching, Jerry, both you and I, if there is a tornado warning that develops for our area, we're going to get off this episode in a hurry and talk to our viewers in our local counties. That's something we have to do and kind of keep one eye on the radar and, you know, one eye talking to you. How has everyone in eastern North Carolina been getting ready for, you know, what's coming our way today? Someone on social media posted today that a tropical system in North Carolina in August is about the most normal thing to happen all year round. Is everyone there ready for it?
You know, and sometimes you fight against that because they say, oh my goodness, just a tropical storm, but you see how quickly now a tropical storm becomes a hurricane. And every storm is different. I try to tell people it's never a good idea to try to compare one storm to the next, because it's not just a question of how strong the storm is, it's a question of what side of it you're going to be on. You know, for instance, you could take a Category 1 hurricane and run it up the coast, and if you happen to be on the east side this time, well, you're going to get worse weather than you did with the Category 1 that came through a few years ago, and you happen to be on the west side. So we always try to emphasize, take every storm seriously, because they all have risks. But it's been a very difficult year on everyone for a wide variety of reasons, as you well know. And so just to have the stress of another storm to have to prepare for, and also just in years past, we have had more than our share of not only hurricanes, but you know, record-setting events. Hurricane Matthew, Hurricane Florence, even Dorian last year did a lot of damage out towards Ocracoke. So we really need a few years of rest here tropically in North Carolina, but sometimes it just doesn't work out that way.
I agree. I'll second that. I'll get you out of here on this, Jerry. What's your biggest concern overnight? You know, it's not going to produce the 10 to 20 inches of rain. It's going to produce some strong winds. We've got the tornado. What are you most worried about impacting your area in eastern North Carolina overnight?
I want to make sure, number one, the timing always bothers me. I would prefer people to be awake so they can at least be aware of what's going on. So I'm really trying to emphasize the timing here is going to be a time when everybody's trying to go to sleep. I want to make sure they're aware of the warnings. And also the winds. I think there's sometimes a tendency, especially since most of the day has been reasonably quiet. We've had some squalls, but nothing strong. And when you go all day and you don't see anything strong, and then you go to bed, you kind of drop your guard. I want to make sure people realize there could be a very sudden uptick in wind gust and tornadoes. That could be an issue for us tonight. And also the surge. I don't want to downplay that. This is not a Category 2 or 3 hurricane, but there will be some surge effects along the coast.
Yeah, excellent point. All right, to you and everyone in eastern North Carolina overnight, Jerry, good luck. That's Jerry Jackson at WNCT in Greenville, North Carolina. All right, our now hurricane again has already set a new record as the earliest 9th named storm in the Atlantic Basin. But when it makes landfall, we'll break yet another record. So let's bring in CBS 17 meteorologist Melissa Lefevre for a look at what record is set to fall, possibly late again tonight.
Well, Wes, 2020 has been nothing short of active. We've had 9 named storms. 4 of those have made landfall in the U.S. Remember, we had Bertha, Cristobal, we had Faye, and most recently we had Hannah there in Texas. Now, as we wait for Isaias to make a landfall, it would be the 5th tropical system to make a landfall in the U.S. this year. Now, the current record for the earliest 5th named Atlantic storm is August 18th, 1916. Of those named storms that made landfall in the U.S. in 1916, 3 of them were hurricanes. That included a Category 2, Category 3, and Category 4. Now, so far this year, 3 of our systems have been tropical storms, with Hannah making landfall as a hurricane. And again, we'll be watching to see as Isaias, as it does make landfall as a hurricane, as we've been talking about, Wes, 8 p.m. Those winds now back up to 75 miles per hour.
Yeah, and all eyes are on this storm, actually. But there's something else out there. Bring us up to date on what else is going on in the Atlantic.
You know, Wes, I mean, we've been focused so much on Isaias, but if you take a look at tropical satellite and radar, you see just south of Bermuda, we've got a little bit of activity ongoing there. That's another system we'll be watching. National Hurricane Center, they have been busy. This disturbance here has a 40% chance of development over the next 2 days, a 60% chance of development over the next 5 days. Again, it's several hundred miles south of Bermuda there, but that's something we'll be watching for. Conditions looking favorable for development in the coming days. We could have a tropical depression forming possibly even later into this week. And if we take a look at our storm name list, this next one much easier to pronounce. Looking at Josephine would be the next name on the list.
So that would be number 10, 7, 8, yeah, number 10. So it's only August, though. It feels like we should be a lot farther down the road in the hurricane season, but we've still got the busiest time to come, right?
Well, that's right, Wes. If we take a look at typically what we would see, where we are right now, if National Hurricane Center, this is where we would typically be in about mid-October for a normal season. So we've already had that activity, 9 named storms potentially looking at that 10th. Here's where we would normally see percentage-wise the named storms per month. Of course, this is for the Atlantic Basin. As you can see, June and July typically on the lower end, but it's really into August and especially September. That's when we see the bulk of our named storms in the Atlantic. That's when we really begin to see that activity increasing. And climatologically speaking, September 10th is the average peak of hurricane season, but it already feels like, again, we should be midway through the season. But Wes, I think if anything, 2020 has taught us it's already been active, it's going to stay active, and we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah, you're right, unfortunately. Melissa Lefevre, thanks so much for the insight. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on what else is going out in the tropics and maybe our 10th named storm. All right, that's Melissa Lefevre right across the studio from me, actually, here in Raleigh at CBS 17. I want to take you out to the famous frying pan tower camera just off the coast of North Carolina. This is a live look. Now, on a normal day when there's not a tropical system or hurricane out in the ocean, it's usually pretty busy. You know, there's no trees or buildings to help knock down the winds. It's just got free and clear, can do it at once, but strong winds. We showed you those gusts, 40 and 50. That flag out there is a shot you probably saw a lot over the last few years. Well, we're back on it live now, the frying pan tower camera. All right, so we've got a lot going on up and down the coast. You know, we most of the time have guests on live with us up and down the coast when something's impacting their area. But tonight, most of the meteorologists up and down the North and South Carolina coast are busy covering the system live on their air. So let's dip into one of those. This is Frank Johnson down in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Let's listen into their coverage live in Myrtle Beach.
Debido already. That'll be moving into Pawleys Island, Litchfield, Murrells Inlet, Garden City. So that's where the strongest winds are going to be with this system, and it's going to be pushing northward. So we are starting to see the worst part of the storm moving into the Grand Strand, and this is something we are going to continue for the next several hours as well. So we're going to continue to watch this. Okay, I think we're done covering the tornadoes. We don't have any more tornado warnings in our part of the Carolinas, but we're going to continue to watch for potential tornadoes if there are any more warnings.
So that was Frank Johnson in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Those 2 tornado warnings we just pointed out, one of them was actually in his viewing area, so he was cutting away to cover that tornado. There's still one active tornado warning left, and that is in New Brunswick County. That's just south of the Wilmington, North Carolina area. So that's a problem that we're going to have as we head throughout the night. Tornadoes popping up as the system moves onshore, heavy rain and wind gusts as those bands of rain move through. I think we're going to go back to the North Carolina coast, and earlier today, people were awaiting the arrival of Isaias on North Carolina's Crystal Coast. There were a number of people on the sand at Atlantic Beach enjoying the last hours of calm before the storm moved inland. Now, some of them wanted to try their luck in the water, but at great risk because of the flags flying warning people that a tropical system was coming and rip current conditions. Listen to this.
Here on Pawleys Island, one of the biggest concerns, of course, is that storm surge. As the storm surge moves through this area, will these dunes be able to hold back the surge or at least prevent some of the damage it may bring? Last year, less than a year ago, really, back in September, Dorian pretty much flattened out all of these dunes and deposited about 2 to 3 feet of sand right in the middle of the street, just behind the houses here, right on the ocean. They're hoping that this renourishment project, which was about 2.6 miles of beach renourishment that just finished back in the spring, that sand may be able to hold back some of this storm surge.
So the water has already come up. Last night, the high tide, the water's already come up. Our hope is that that beach renourishment will remain, that sand won't be taken away. That's the biggest concern. It probably is going to help us. It should. That's why it's there.
And that's pretty much one of the biggest threats specifically to Pawleys Island at this time. On Pawleys Island, I'm Raymond Owens. Back to you.
All right, so that was a report from South Carolina. Sorry about that. Let's go back to the coast of North Carolina. And earlier today, people were awaiting the arrival of Isaias on the North Carolina Crystal Coast. There were a number of people on the sand in Atlantic Beach enjoying the last hours of calm before the storm. Some even tried their luck in the water, but at great risk because of all the warning flags. Rip current conditions were one of the bigger problems.
You know, like I said, this beach right here was our plan B because we did see the tropical storm coming in, and a lot of people, they hear tropical storm or hurricane and they haul out of town, but I mean, there's a lot of local businesses that depend on the people that come out here, and you know, we feel good supporting those people, and I mean, you can still have fun if the weather's bad, so yeah.
All right, a pandemic and a tropical system, and there's still plenty of people on the beaches. All right, so it's approaching 8:30. Let's check in one more time with the active radar. As you can see, still one active tornado warning. Actually, there's a second one that just popped up right next to it there in the Wilmington area. So 2 active tornado warnings. If you think about it, tropical systems are giant areas of circulation. And when they move inland, they start to have some resistance with the land, and that creates a little bit of friction, and that can create little small swirls amongst the giant swirls. So that's one of the reasons why when a tropical system comes inland that we have tornadoes to watch out for, and as you can see, 2 live ones. I want to finish with this. I want to take you back to last Wednesday. Last Wednesday was the first time parts of North and South Carolina were in the cone of uncertainty. We mentioned off the top of the newscast that this is the 5th day Isaias has been a named tropical system. That's the longest of any system so far this year. But it was last Wednesday that the first time that North and South Carolina were put in the National Hurricane Center cone of uncertainty. So I just wanted to point that out. This was the first look, the first forecast at where this storm was going to be. So this was last Wednesday at 11 p.m., and this was where they thought the storm was going to be. A tropical storm over, let's call it, the southern beaches of North Carolina. But remember, the cone tells us that this is where we think the center will be. It could be over here, it could be out here, it could be up here, it could be down here. So at 8 o'clock Monday, which is where we were 27 minutes ago, this was the forecast, and it's actually right about here at this point. And I would call that a pretty good forecast. While it's not exact, the National Hurricane Center and the men and women down there keeping an eye out for everything for us did a pretty darn good job of forecasting this system. We will continue to do the same, keeping an eye on Tropical Storm, now Hurricane Isaias, right here on Tracking the Tropics. We want to thank you for joining us. We'll be back here again tomorrow night. It's our regular scheduled time, 8 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday night, but you know we're going to be talking a lot about the hurricane that is about to make landfall. We are here every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock during the hurricane season. We appreciate you spending part of your night with us. Live in Raleigh, North Carolina, I'm Wes Hohenstein. Good night.